It's a great pleasure to have you here. Welcome to another Fire Chat. This time we are very, very excited to have Julie Weeks. Just to go over some logistics, there is a chat button in the bottom here. I'm just going to put hi, and thanks for the people who are saying hi on the chat. There's a chat button here. You can, I'm just going to say hi on the chat. Yep. And I am also, I'm going to mute everybody. You can send me the questions that you have, and we'll go over the questions. I have a list of questions here. This is a chit chat between Julie and I. Some of the questions that came before today. Julie is joining us all the way from Michigan. There she is.
Hello.
And she is, amongst many other things, the CEO and founder of Womenable. Womenable is an organization that is empowering women. It's a huge resource tool. You have tons and tons of information. We will talk a little bit more about that, and I'm very, very excited to have her here. Julie Weeks has over 30 years of experience in the fields of research, design, and analysis, public policy, and women's enterprise development. Before she launched Womenable in 2005, she was...
Christ, right? To come back from the 90s, he had duck his...
Okay, we are unmuting everybody now as they come in. Good. So, Julie, before she was... Before she started Womenable in 2005, she spent 3 years as executive director of the National Women's Business Council. And before that, she was the managing director and the director of research for the Center for Women's Business Research. In addition to her work leading Womenable, Weeks serves on the boards of Leelanau Conservancy. She will explain to you what that is, and if I mispronounce that, that adds charm to the chat. And she's on the advisory board of We Connect International and on the editorial board of Enterprising Women magazine and the International Journal of Gender and Entrepreneurship. I would like you to join me in welcoming Julia Weeks to our conversation. Julia, thank you. Julie, I don't know why I keep calling you Julia. It's because
That's okay.
It's the Spanish in me.
No worries. Yeah.
I don't worry. Julie, your career has spanned from various jobs and careers. I want to start by asking you, how did you get interested in women's issues and women in business?
Well, I think it started when I was a girl, and certainly being a feminist, looking around and seeing inequality. I also was very interested in statistics and research and that sort of thing. And when my first part of my career, I was a political pollster doing work for candidates and ballot initiatives, and I found I was much more interested in working for the female candidates. And one of those female candidates who ended up not winning her race for the U.S. Senate became the head of the U.S. Small Business Administration and wanted me to come to Washington to work in the Office of Economic Research. So that got me to Washington, where I started to see entrepreneurship as a field. And so I melded my feminism with research and entrepreneurship, and I guess the rest is history, right? I did some public sector work, nonprofit research work. Now I'm owning my own business and consultancy, working to empower women's entrepreneurship.
That's great. And have you seen a common thread in what has happened in the years you've been involved?
Yes, actually I have. And a lot of the work that I've seen, again, in the government and in the nonprofit sector, I've seen a lot of the support and programs that are aimed at women business owners, getting them started and helping them grow, aiming too low. I think. So one of the common threads, I think, is underestimating women-owned businesses and women business owners, not only underestimating their growth potential, but underestimating them in terms of counts and that sort of thing, just the data and the research. And, the title of this talk and the focus is on definitions, and do definitions matter? And there have been varying definitions of what a women-owned business is early on, not including all women business owners, and therefore undercounting and undervaluing their contributions. So I think the common thread has been aiming too low and underestimating the power of women in business.
That's very interesting. I interview and I work with a researcher who specialized in gender issues in entrepreneurship. And he discovered that when we adjust for age and size of the business and field, women-led businesses were much more profitable than men-led businesses. But it doesn't seem to be the case in economic metrics. I don't know if you have some very specific examples, and that is why we chose the topic of this fire chat. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, actually, what I call the big bang of women's entrepreneurship in the United States was the passage of a law, the Women's Business Ownership Act of 1988. And one of the things that law did was directed our U.S. Census Bureau to start counting all women-owned businesses, because prior to that, they didn't have all industries counted, and they didn't include C corporations. And in the U.S., there are essentially three legal forms of organization for a business. You could be a sole proprietor, which is at the small end of the spectrum. You could be a partnership, or you could be a corporation. And C corporations are the largest kind of a corporation. All the firms that are publicly traded are C corporations, and the Census Bureau had not included women-owned C corporations in their census. And so that law was passed, as I said, in 1988. The first census that came after that was the 1992 census, which was published in 1995. And I know I'm getting a little bit granular here, but what's interesting is that when they included all industries and C corporations for the first time, the number of women-owned firms only increased by 9%, but the employment counted for by women-owned firms more than doubled. It went up 111%. And the revenues that were accounted for by women-owned firms went up 145%. And so starting in 1995 in the United States, there was a real awakening of a much truer and complete picture of the economic contributions of women-owned firms. Prior to that time, a lot of people, governments, corporations, others, just thought women-owned firms were small, home-based, not financially sound, and finding out that they were employing so many more people and generating so much more revenue than they would have thought, it really caused women-owned firms to be considered a real, true, legitimate market, and a much more being taken seriously, really marking from 1995 onwards. So definitions and how you count heads really, really does matter.
Wow. Is there anything that we can do personally to raise awareness of that, or to realize how important it is? Because I see, I hear and I see a lot of conversations and a lot of explanations about why women don't have big businesses, or why women this and that, and, mansplaining or femsplaining, however you want to talk. And I think it's important to raise the awareness that is not so true. And if we really look around, women-owned businesses or women economic impact can be more visible than it is now.
Right. And, I've been involved for the last 6 years on some research that's been published every year looking at the state of women-owned businesses in the United States based upon data from the U.S. Census Bureau. And that data has found time and time again that Women are starting businesses at a much faster rate than average. Employment and revenue are growing faster than every other kind of business except for the large publicly traded companies. But at the same time, the share of women-owned firms that are $1 million or more in revenue has remained at 2% for the last 15 years. And their share of employment and revenues has likewise remained fairly flat. And, I started to realize when I was also doing some work looking at Dun & Bradstreet data, which includes not only majority women-owned firms, because that's the definition that our U.S. government and really most other governments around the world use for what is a woman-owned business. It's 51% or more women-owned. But if you take a look at firms that are women-owned or women-led, meaning that they are helmed by a woman, she's the CEO, but she may not have 51% ownership if she's got equity stakeholders, either outside equity or senior management that's sharing in ownership. I think one of the undervaluing that's going on now, and the reason why a lot of people are saying, oh, women-owned firms that are just not growing, is because of the definition of a woman-owned business right now as the 51% or more owned. And so a lot of women are essentially growing past the majority ownership definition. Most women-owned firms that are multi-million-dollar firms, at least according to Dun & Bradstreet data, are actually plurality owned by the woman, less than 51%. And so we're missing that very important segment of the women's business community by narrowing our definition to just be majority women owned. So I think that's the new challenge now, is to kind of widen our lens and look at all the various aspects of women's entrepreneurship beyond that definition of majority women owned.
I think that's right. I want to share here with the group. I'm sorry for the people that are on the phone, but I want to share here with the group one slide. You just put it one slide that you sent me that I think it's very telling. Maybe you can explain what those numbers mean in a way that people on the phone can listen to that. I'll upload the recording of this conversation anyway, but I think it's very telling. Mm-hmm. Let me just put this up here.
Right.
So you say here that 1 in 4 commercially active firms in the U.S. are female managed. What does that mean?
Well, what this says is that actually 3/4 of the female managed firms are either women-led or equally owned. What I'm saying, this particular chart, if we first take a look at the rightmost bar, which is everybody regardless of revenue, and this is among a population of commercially active businesses that's in the Dun & Bradstreet database. So it doesn't include small part-time businesses. So these are the firms that are out there trading, getting credit references, going for business loans and that sort of thing. And it shows that only 27% of those businesses that are female-led are actually majority female-owned. So that means that 3/4 of the population of commercially active businesses that are led by a woman are plurality owned by a woman. Either they're 50-50 owned, a man and a woman, or they're one of several owners, but they essentially have the largest share, or they are the CEO. So this is showing that we're missing a huge portion of the population of women-owned firms by using that more restrictive majority-owned definition. Now, if you look beyond just the total bar in this particular chart and look at the size bands, the vast majority of commercially active women-owned firms less than $1 million in revenue are not majority-owned, and a lot of those include equally owned, what we call mom-and-pop stores or mom-and-pop businesses with their equally owned husband and wife, that sort of thing. But what's important, I think, in this chart is to look at the 1 to 9.9 million and the 10 to 999 million. That particular band, the 10 million to a billion, are called middle market firms, and fully half of these firms, and these are multi-million-dollar businesses, are not majority owned by a woman, but they're a female CEO in the business. So this is showing why the percentage of multi-million-dollar women-owned businesses in the Census Bureau has remained at 2% of all women-owned firms, even though more and more women are getting above $1 million in revenue. And that's because as they grow, they are no longer majority women-owned. So I think having a greater understanding of this transition that happens as a woman grows her business is extremely important. And we need to do a whole lot more research into this growth continuum, and who are the women who are leading these businesses, but they're, as I say, growing past that restrictive definition of majority women-owned.
This is very, very interesting. I heard once that just get these here. I heard once that some women who didn't work actively because of motherhood and went back to the workforce and decided to start their company, they would use their husbands or their partners as partners, equity partners in the firm, so they could have access to capital. So that would be in line to what you're saying, although the husband or the male figure was more of a decorative figure there to be able to give it some background.
That was a whole lot more common maybe a generation ago, at least from the United States point of view. It wasn't until 1974 that women could get credit in their own name, personal credit in their own name. Then there was 1974. Oh, so there was a law passed, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that gave women access to personal credit, but they still did not have access to business credit until that Women's Business Ownership Act of 1988. So if a woman had a business prior to 1988, even if she was 100% owner of that business, she had to have a male co-sign her business loan, like her husband or uncle or even her son, even if they had nothing to do with the business, which was quite maddening to women business owners, which is why that was included in that piece of legislation. There was a lot of active lobbying by women business owners, especially the National Association of Women Business Owners, to get that legislation passed. So that was something that was very annoying to the women business owners who were the members of NAWBO, who had to get a male co-signer. So as a business grows, even if you're starting out with multiple owners, and you're not 50% or 51%, I mean, you're starting, businesses that start with multiple owners have a higher growth trajectory. And so, they may not be majority women owned from the get-go, and therefore the women's leadership in those businesses is really not observed or cataloged or counted really. But I think the majority or a lot of the cases are the women who start out being majority owned, and so they are being followed, I guess you could say, tracked by government and other statistics. But as they get bigger, they disappear. If they get to the point where they're adding equity shareholders to the business, as I say, either a senior management or outside venture or angel capital, then she disappears from the radar screen of government data. So it's important, as I say, for us to figure out how we can follow these women as they grow their businesses to that level.
I think this is a revelation for me. I didn't know that.
It was a revelation for me too about, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years ago. because so much of what goes on in the government and also in corporate spending, all the supplier diversity efforts that are going on with corporations for women-owned firms and for minority-owned firms all have the definition of majority ownership. If a corporation's going to count their spend with you, the woman-owned business or the minority-owned business, you have to be a majority owner of the business. And so in a way, even though you're getting market opportunity by selling your goods or services to a large corporation or to the federal government or to state governments too, you have to meet that criteria of majority ownership. So as you grow, you're kind of pinched between wanting to sell to the government or large corporations and then really wanting to grow your business by adding, more partners in your business. And so once you do that, then you can lose market opportunity. It's kind of a catch-22 situation, I guess you could say.
I think we will need to have a fire chat about bridging that gap, because there's two very, very powerful organizations. One is run by large corporations that want to include more minorities. So they have a whole system to include minorities in their supply channel. And it's not...
Yeah, the National Minority Supplier Diversity Council, NMSDC, yeah.
Yes, and also there's women in public policy as well. They try to promote more women in women entrepreneurs. And until I talked to you, I was completely ignorant then about the impact of defining women entrepreneurs or women-led businesses.
And the women's own equivalent to NMSDC is WBENC, the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. They certify women-owned firms as being majority women-owned to sell to corporations. And you're right that Women Impacting Public Policy does a lot of advocacy for women in federal procurement, which is another growth avenue to sell your goods and services to the federal government. And all of those organizations which are getting women into the pipeline to supply to government agencies and to large corporations, they're all adhering to this majority ownership definition because that's kind of, always been that way. It's a heritage and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that we need to change that necessarily. I think we can add to it. I wouldn't do away with the majority ownership definition because, frankly, from an international point of view, it makes things a lot more congruent with how other countries count their populations of women-owned businesses. But I think we need to expand our definition to include women-led firms as well as majority women-owned.
I think this is, to me, this is very exciting. I belong to a group of investors. There's a couple of people in the call that are also women and are in the same group, and there's guys also in the call. So I don't know if any guy wants to stick out there.
Men are welcome, absolutely.
Of course, we're together, but what I find is interesting is I don't know how our investment it's recorded because our group is very heterogeneous. So I assume that they would count our investment as non-minority investment. So if that is true, then when a woman wants to grow the business and comes for angel investment or for VCs and continues to grow the business, chances are that they're going to end up with a smaller chunk of the business. So it might actually be reported as a failure. One of the things that we saw in doing some research was that when a company is a sole proprietary company or is a small participation-based company and moves into a C-type corp, sometimes you have to close the company and open another company. Well, it is recorded as a failure, but it's not really a failure. It's a success, but we don't have a way to record that. Now I'm thinking that there, like you said, probably the reason why we don't see women-led businesses or women entrepreneurs running these huge enterprises is because they obviously they need to attract more capital, and sometimes they need to bring in more investments, and they lose that. I'm just very surprised by that because I didn't think about that before.
And it's really very difficult to track on a longitudinal basis, the journey of a woman entrepreneur when she starts out. You say she is either a sole proprietorship or maybe a partnership with one or two other people, or an LLC or something like that. And then as she grows, if she does have to change legal form of organization to a corporation, which you obviously would do as you're growing, then you would probably change your DUNS number. I mean, you might be looked at as a business closure and then an all of a sudden new business, as opposed to a transition as you're growing, and following that kind of a journey from a research or an analytical point of view is difficult. It's something that we really do need to grapple with a little bit more.
Well, I like the fact that I'm more alert now to seeing the numbers, and I say, oh, well, this doesn't validate that. We have a question from Jan. How does knowing this impact? How does knowing the growth? I think Jan, you were talking about the growth. How does this impact women who are seeking investments in a startup? What can we take from this that will help us? I assume it's helping women. I assume you mean, Jan, that can this help women seeking investments? I think that's please clarify if that's not true.
If you are a startup and you're seeking investment, I guess, as a business owner, you have to figure out where you're going to be going for customers as you grow your business. If that 51% definition is important to you because you want to sell to large corporations or to public sector government entities, then you have to be very careful not to drop below that 51% threshold, because then you would not be a woman-owned business anymore, and then you might not be able to, a corporation wouldn't be able to count their spending with you as being a woman-owned business. However, if that doesn't matter to you, and the opportunities for growth in selling your product or service is such that having more investment is going to launch you, then that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want a 51% threshold to hold anybody back from growing your business from 500,000 to 5 million to 50 million or beyond. But it is something to pay attention to if some of your customers, if it's important for some of your customers to be able to say you're a woman-owned business. So that 51% threshold is important.
I think knowing a little bit about Jan's business, I think it would be great for her to start to have the certification and start attracting people, but to see that in the long term, you might have to lose that. So that just helps you plan strategically instead of reacting to that. I do know a couple of cases of women-led businesses that sold to Google, and they had to get out of the program. And what happened was that the program was made so they could sell to them, and they thought, well, we'll get to the stage where we don't need that. Well, they ended up in this vacuum where they were not strong enough to support themselves without this program, and they were caught in that, and they had to leave the program, and they'll figure it out. But it was really interesting what happened to them, and I think it's very interesting for us to just be aware of that so we can plan.
Yeah, and when you're on that kind of growth journey, there are a number of stumbling blocks, and perhaps the threshold of 51% is the least of an entrepreneur's worries, as they grow their business. There's a lot of other things that are probably more important, to systems, back office systems in the business, finding the right key employees and all that sort of thing. And if to gain, the right person to be your senior vice president for whatever, you have to give them an equity stake in the business, then by all means, I wouldn't let that 51% definition hold you back. Certainly.
Exactly, but you need to know that it might have another impact.
It might close another door for you if you want to sell to a corporation that wants to count you as a woman-owned business, or if you want to go after federal contracts or state or local government contracts under a program that's focused on women-owned businesses.
Okay, I guess this is the same for any minority, right? Because a lot
absolutely, that 51% definition is for any minority-owned business, service disabled or veteran-owned businesses. They all the specialized programs for procurement, at least, they have that majority ownership threshold.
Okay, I have a question here that was sent by some of the people in our group. A lot of people in the group. This is for those of you who are not part of the Women Get Funded program. I run a program called Women Get Funded to increase the education, to increase the competence of women getting funded, not only by angels but by many forms of funding. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the participants are not in the U.S. So some of them send me the questions, and this is one of them that is, I think it's very critical. Are these trends in growth, in women growth, global, or do you think they're primarily for the U.S.? We see a lot of information about women in Turkey, women in Africa. There's a big Forbes of the article about the 100 most influential women in
right.
Africa, in business in Africa. So do you know anything about that? And another question attached to that is, which country is leading the way for women entrepreneurs?
Mm-hmm. In answer to the first question, these trends are indeed global. To the extent that we know what's going on in various countries, because the level of research and focus differs from country to country. But wherever I've done research or analysis, and that's been in a dozen or 24 countries around the world, the challenges that women face, the characteristics that they share, draw them together far more than there are any kind of differences. There are certainly some differences from country to country in the ability of women to access capital, their ability to access formal or informal networks, having women's business associations and other groups that will support them, and having national level policies that are targeted or recognize the need to focus on women-owned businesses. So there are certainly differences there, but all the challenges that women face as they grow their businesses are common across pretty much every country and every region. That said, what countries are doing better than others? There is some research that's been done that I did some assistance with, called the Global Women Entrepreneur Leaders Scorecard. Last year and the year before, it took a look at 30 or more countries to see what is existing to support a growth-oriented women business owner, and what countries are doing well in supporting the growth of women-owned firms as opposed to just getting women into business in the first place. And the top countries in that scorecard are the United States is number one, then Canada, Australia, Sweden, and the UK. Those are the top 5 countries. And at the other end of the spectrum are Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. Those are at the bottom of the list in terms of support for growth-oriented entrepreneurship. Perhaps some of the people who are going to be viewing this podcast will be familiar with the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which looks at many more countries and just looks at the share of the adult population in those countries that are women-owned. And there's a wide variety of not only the level of entrepreneurship in a country, but the share of business owners that are female-owned. And in that regard, the United States is not number one, more in the top third. But there are a lot of other countries where there are more women entrepreneurs out of necessity, than entrepreneurs that are following an opportunity. So there is a nuance and a difference between you are starting a business because you have no other option, or you're starting a business that's focused on growth and you're seeking an opportunity. So I would look at the Global Women Entrepreneur Leaders Scorecard and the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor to look at some trends internationally.
This is for the people that are in the call. This is the website of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor.
There are some special women in entrepreneurship reports. So if you find on that website, I think you click on reports, and then there's special topics, special topic reports, and you will see all of the women's reports. There are half a dozen of them. Yeah, the most recent, as you see, was published toward the end of 2015.
Yeah, and I think these are free, right? These reports.
Yes, they are free. Yeah.
So you can download it. And for people who are from overseas, this is a global alliance, so there's a lot of countries. It's just not one. So you can search for the countries. It's a very extensive report about entrepreneurship in general.
Yes, yes.
So you have all these countries. I don't know how many they are, but it's very, very extensive.
It varies by year because each of the countries are responsible for finding the funding to do their analysis, and most of the country organizations are housed in universities. So there's a consortium mostly of academic researchers, but some public sector support as well. It's a fabulous initiative. It's been going on for over a decade.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and it gives you a lot of data, but you have to be careful how you analyze data, because like Julie
sometimes it gives you a little more than you'd want, but it's not for me, of course, but for others.
Well, because you're a researcher.
Yeah, exactly. The more data, the better.
Research designer, which is a little bit out there, a little bit.
Sometimes it's missing or a little bit light on the so what, or the implications of it. At least early on, a lot of the research stayed in the ivory tower, but they're a lot better now at looking at the implications for public policy and for practice. So yeah, very, very good resources. So for anybody out there watching this, look it up, because you're likely to find your country there.
What is your website of the women leadership?
I don't remember, but I know that you can find the report on womenable.com.
Okay.
It might be gwel.org.
Let me just look at.
I should have looked that up ahead of time to tell you about it, but it's.
That's okay. We're on your website, so we would see here where.
I think you can look at the Womenabler reference library. Yeah, and
now you get it.
And it ought to be there. It better be, right? If it's not, I'm going to embarrass myself.
Well, you have a lot. As I said, I love this. I love this site because it has so many resources, and it's just so interesting and varied.
It might be alphabetically listed under Dell, which was the underwriter of it last year and the year before. Is it under Dell?
No, this Diana project. The Diana project is a project about women getting funded, where I was a co-chair. You were involved with them as well, right?
Oh yes, I've been involved with Diana. They just had their conference last week.
Yeah. So anyway, in women,
it's there somewhere, I know, and you can also just Google the GWEL scorecard, and it will pop up. I've probably got a link to other Womenablers. There might be a link to that website there as well, but I'm
sure we will find it. I'll send it to the group. Now that we're here on your website, can you tell us more about what do you do and how people can use these?
Well, what Womenable does, we're a consultancy that works with essentially the enablers of women's enterprise. So not women business owners themselves, but governments, corporations, multilateral groups like the World Bank, And our focus is on the infrastructure that supports women's business development. So it's taking a look largely through research, whether it's quantitative research or a qualitative examination of the business enabling environment in a country. What exists to support women-owned firms in a given environment, what is missing, and what kind of recommendations for action would we bring to the table for a government, for a corporation, for any kind of an entity that wants to support women's entrepreneurship. What needs to be done to help rise the tide that will lift all boats? So that our focus is on the environment and enabling women's entrepreneurship as opposed to training or one-on-one assistance. So what you can find on our website is a lot, as you just showed, a lot of the research that's been done not only by Womenable, but by everybody else out there that we can find, so that we can be a repository for that kind of information that will be useful for an individual woman business owner. You can use it for advocacy purposes. You can use it with seeking and obtaining funding. If you're going to be talking to a bank or an equity investment entity, you're going to want to come armed with some facts and figures. And I think a lot of what we have on our website can help in that way. And we can help organizations that are looking to where the gaps are that they can help address.
Yeah, and you're a valid reference point as well. So one of the things that I see very often when people talk about women entrepreneurs is the lack of credible resources or credible facts. And media, social media, traditional media, they're not researchers. So a journalist can take some data and just run with it, and it just it's not credible. One of those examples is the perception that 80% of businesses fail within 5 years, and that is not true.
Yeah, not true.
The number is 13%. The rest of the companies, they close, they rearrange, they grow. Maybe they were never meant to be a commercial enterprise. Maybe they did it to shield assets or to transfer money. And there's so many reasons. And so a lot of journalists would take things out of context. So I think Womenable is a great resource for finding data, and it's credible. So I it's not because I'm having Julie here, but when I found it, I thought this is a great resource, and I wanted to share that for people in general, not only for entrepreneurs, but just to dispel some of the myths. Yeah,
there are a lot of myths out there, that's for sure, and there are a lot of data that once it gets one or two generations or sources removed from the original, it can take on a life of its own and may not always be what the true fact is. So what we want to do is put out the original research, the link to the exact report, so that people can find it, at its source.
Great. I have another question coming from the audience here. Is family support important for women entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. It's important for men entrepreneurs too, right? Because you need to have support, if for nothing else than to come home at night and have somebody else has cooked dinner already, right? But also, I mean, in a lot of other countries, women can't get credit in their own names, do not have the ability to own or inherit property. And so if she wants to start a business and get put up collateral for a loan, if her spouse is not supportive and would agree to help produce that collateral, then she's not going to grow her business. So, in developed economies where women can get credit in their own name, it's still extremely important because, as we all know, entrepreneurship is a very time-consuming business, and you need to be able to balance work with family life and to have a supportive family, whether it's a spouse or a partner or children or even your abuela to babysit your children.
Or the children to make dinner.
Absolutely, yeah. You can't start them too young with learning how to cook meals. So it's very important because you need to have that kind of nurturing at the end of a day when you just kind of want to put your feet up and debrief, right? You need some understanding ears at home when you get home at midnight or whenever it is.
Or when you don't get home and they can bring you lunch.
Well, that's true. When you're traveling on business too, and you're Skyping or Zooming with other people halfway around the world, it's important to have that kind of support for emotionally as well as just the logistics of getting everything done in your life.
Yeah, well, I like the way that you put it on, that it was the same for men and women. So men also.
It is. It's harder for women though, because there's certainly we're expected, we women, to do the home front and to manage that as well as do whatever we do professionally. So it's even more important for women to have understanding domestic partners to support those needs.
Yeah, or have their parents support them as well, or the children. It's,
absolutely. Any generation will do, even a cousin. Yeah.
The dog.
Right. It's important to have a dog or a cat at the end of the day because, they just look at you and they're not asking for anything but love and attention.
They love you no matter what.
Right.
You can fire your dog and they still love you. So that's. I have another question here now that we're talking about men and women. What do you think is the main difference in practical terms between women and men entrepreneurs and on how they run their businesses?
That's very interesting. I did one of the first studies that I did when I joined the Center for Women's Business Research was something called Styles of Success. And it was taking women and men entrepreneurs in a focus group setting, but also in taking a management test similar to Myers-Briggs, to figure out what kind of thinking and managerial styles you have. And women were found to be much less hierarchical, much more likely to consider themselves at the center of a wheel than at the top of a pyramid when they're kind of structuring in their business. Women, generally speaking, are also more consultative when making decisions. We'll ask other women business owners, men business owners, their employees, what they think about an impending decision, whether it's, I don't know, what company should we get for our healthcare benefits or for our telecom or whatever. From the outside, historically, people have thought that means women are more hesitant, that they're not as, take charge. But women will most likely get to the same decision perhaps that a male entrepreneur would get to. It may take longer because of that consultative process. So those are some, in real and practical terms, some of the differences in the management and leadership styles. It's not a difference in what a business owner does, male or female. It's kind of how they do it. The processes that we women go through to lead and to make decisions is typically somewhat different.
And that's in general for women, or is that more in developed countries? Do you know if there's been any studies on that?
I don't know what kind of global research has been done in that regard. It would be interesting to find out. My sense is that women are just a little bit more balanced in their decision making between logic and intuition, the left brain and the right brain. Mm-hmm. And I think that biologically that would be the same for females all around the world. Mm-hmm. In practical terms, there may be cultural reasons why women in a given region might be a little bit different than women in another region. If there are more constraints, they have to be a lot more adaptable to figure out how to get to where they want to go. It might not be a straight line if there are some cultural or legal constraints in the way. But generally speaking, I think the way women approach leadership and management is going to be pretty much similar regardless of what region of the world.
I think it's interesting because the difference between an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur it's bigger than
That's bigger than the difference between men and women business owners. Absolutely
yeah,
right. Absolutely right.
And you,
Yep.
when you're an entrepreneur, you tend to be more accountable, more resilient.
You're looking out, you're planning for the future, you're more proactive than reactive.
Yeah.
You're more strategic
Yeah.
because you're in charge of your own life, whereas employees kind of wait for instructions, right? Entrepreneurs don't have an instruction manual. They're writing it as they go along. And they're looking out for opportunity.
And acting upon it. They don't think about it. They take action. So that's
right.
And if that's not their personality, they learn to behave that way very quickly.
And they surround themselves with some other either senior managers or another partner who balances their style of decision-making and leadership. I mean, a good business owner will do that. They'll recognize where they have weaknesses and strengths and will balance that in their management team.
Yeah, I certainly have done that, and I've invested in people who do that, and that's and it's all different for anyone, but it's just that learning that you can't do it all. That's very important.
Right.
I have another question from the group. How strong female role models would impact women in becoming entrepreneurs?
Oh, I think it's huge. It's huge. There's a saying that if you can see it, you can be it, and the converse is true. If you can't see it, then you don't think you could be it. So if you're in a community or a society where you see strong women leaders, be they in business, be they in politics, be they in the social sector, then you as a girl, young woman, see that as a possibility. And if you look around and you don't see that anywhere, then you're less likely to have the ambition to go there. I mean, certainly there are those who are going to break ground and do it regardless. But having role models, visible leaders is very important, as is having mentors. A role model can be somebody off in the distance that you observe that you would never meet, one-on-one, but a mentor, somebody who you can ask questions of, who you can bounce ideas off of, who can give you some guidance and support, is also extremely important.
I have to say thank Fernanda for asking the question, and to thank everybody who has written to me or to the group saying that that's why their business exists. And I want to thank you, because that's why my business exists, and that's why your business exists. So we're all in the same boat. It's
a wonderful virtuous circle.
Yes, and I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, growing up in a small rural town in Venezuela, it was never the possibility of becoming a businesswoman. Nevertheless, to becoming an investor, I can't explain to my parents what I do, because they're socialist, and they have lived that, and I love the entrepreneurs that I invest in, and I look at people like you and like many other people, and young people that are trying to do something that is inspiring, and I just feel very inspired by that. Thank you for the question, Fernanda, and thank you for the answer, Julia.
All very good questions. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to start charging for that. I know that a group here are going to take some snippets of that answer and put that on their site, or trying to do that.
Good.
Please refer to Womenable there.
Wonderful.
We're like 6 minutes short. I want to make sure that we cover all of the questions. I just have there are many other questions, but there are two that I think are very, very important, and I want to make sure that we cover that. And one of the question is, I'm gonna talk about the two of them, Julie, so you can respond to them.
Okay.
So one of them is, how can we support more women entrepreneurs? And the other one is, where can people find more information and what can we do about it? How do we execute something and not just keep talking? So leave it on to you.
Well, in terms of how we can help build a stronger community of women business owners, I would say, first of all, buy from women.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, so support women entrepreneurs with your dollars or your pesos or whatever. I always try to find a product or a service that's women-owned. I find it fascinating to see the variety of the kinds of businesses that women have, and so patronize or matronize your local women-owned businesses. Find out if there are options for you, either goods that you buy or services that you need to procure. I would say also, if you are a woman business owner yourself, join with others and just share ideas, support each other, just by being a sounding board, being a friend, being a mentor maybe, and be more visible. I think one of the things that women do or don't do, I guess you could say, is we're busy focusing on our business, and we don't realize how important our example is. And we say, oh, I don't really want to go after that award. I don't care about being on a list of the coolest women business owners in my city. But the men are applying for those awards and those recognitions. So why aren't we? And if you see a really interesting woman business owner, nominate them for something. Support them that way too. Shine a light, because when you can shine a light, then more people will see them as role models, and you'll kind of build some momentum. You may inspire a young woman to start a business that might not otherwise have been inspired. So I would say those are all that, yeah.
To work for a women-led or a women entrepreneur. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. and if you're working for one, then you'll understand, you'll see the different management style and that sort of thing. And you may get inspired then to start your own business. So anyway, I think those are all the various ways that we can support women in business. And your other question was, where can we go for information, or what can we do? I really think this whole conversation about expanding our lens of what women entrepreneurs are and going beyond this definition of 51% is really important, because it's not talked about much. So I would say everybody who's on this webinar now and who will be looking at this podcast later, you now have some interesting facts and ideas to share. So I would say be an ambassador, be a conversation starter about how can we understand more about women-led businesses as they grow and get beyond that 51% threshold. How can we better understand and talk about this growth journey and not limit it by that one definition? So I would exhort everybody to be conversation starters and ambassadors for that concept.
Thank you so much. It was so inspiring. We have 1 more minute to go. I'm gonna quickly unmute the people who are on the phone. The people who are online, they can send us any questions or to everybody on the chat. But I'm gonna just quickly unmute the people who are on the phone in case they have any questions. You have like 30 seconds. And then I'll go back to Julie. Yeah. So I have 2 people here on the phone. And this is like, it's now or never.
Not really never. You can certainly email me, anybody who's watching live or watching later. Go to womenable.com or email me at jweeks@womenable.com if you have any questions.
Great.
So it's not really now or never. So
now or later. Okay. So So I guess that's it for now. We have a wonderful webinar. Thank you so much, Julie.
Pleasure.
As usual, I leave the guest speakers to end the webinar with their final words for today's chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I'm very inspired and excited about these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, my final word is to think holistically and more expansively about women's entrepreneurship. Go beyond the 51%.
I love that. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.